All right, everyone, I want to thank you all for coming today. I know the weather hasn't exactly been cooperating with any of us getting here to class, so we are running slightly late, so I do want to get going. Today, I feel like I've been saying this all semester. Today is actually our last true, full, two-person lecture of the year. But anyways, I'm very, very excited about our presentation today. Today we're going to be talking about food politics and corporate responsibility, and we are very lucky to have Dr. John Ford from GW as our GW lecturer, and Marion Nessel, she is over in the corner here, as our guest lecturer, who's come down from New York City today to join us. So we'll start with Dr. Ford's presentation. Dr. Ford is an associate research professor with the Strategic Management Program in the School of Business, and he's an associate faculty member in the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration as well. He serves as the administrative director of the GW Institute for Corporate Responsibility, and he also teaches courses at GW on privatization and global governance. And his current research activities include the economic consequences of sanctions, privatization, public-private partnerships, and global governance.
Sounds like a lot. That's enough, isn't it?
Yeah.
Good. Well, welcome all of you. So, food and politics and corporate responsibilities, that's a very big area for us. So I thought we'd try to go through just a number of different kind of issues. Some of it, of course, is about what it is we want out of food as a matter of policy, what roles corporations might play in helping us achieve those roles. I'm going to talk a little bit about the complexity, I think, of the food and the politics, focusing a little bit on not only how we think about the issue, how we talk about the issue. You'll see in the end that where I'm going to get to is maybe a way of collaborating business, NGOs, government, civil society, all working together to solve, or at least try to address these problems. A lot of times that's seen as a conflict, different interests, opposing interests between these groups. I'm going to suggest one way of moving forward is if we can do it in a collaborative way. And as you'll see in the beginning, if we're going to collaborate, then we have to have a better understanding maybe of what it is we want, what it is we mean by certain words and certain terms, if we're going to actually understand each other and collaborate. So why don't we go through, and then in the end we have a little challenge for Jose if he's willing to make that. Okay, so like I say, food used to be simple. This is taken from a recipe book back around 1620. Corn grits, water, milk, right? That's it, sand, what people used to eat. And all, as you can see, very local here. The corn gotten locally, the milk gotten locally, the water. So maybe it's the perfect food for many of the values that we talk about having food today, right? It's good for you, it's local, sustainable, all those things. But of course, who wouldn't eat it? No one today would eat that kind of food. So we have a little bit of a challenge of how do we, going back, how do we achieve those same values in things that we want from food, but still eat the things that we eat today, right? Not always thinking that in order to achieve those values, you just have to eat the same all the time. Okay, so what did I have for breakfast? This is my typical breakfast. But you can see even here, as compared to the Sam, right? So the bananas don't come locally, right? They have to be imported, grown by people somewhere. Do they meet certain standards? How much are the people paid who pick those bananas? And the coffee, right? The same way. The bagels, probably not too complicated. I had Drew, who helped me with this. His is just slightly different with his apple and coffee. But if you talk about yogurt and Greek yogurt, what's in there? Can you see the all-natural on there? On the Greek yogurt? So even that, what does that mean, all natural? It's a little bit of marketing. It's a little bit of aspiration. It's trying to create an impression about the yogurt that is good for you somehow, but being all natural. I'm not sure those words all natural maybe mean as much as we would want them to. Or some people think they mean more, some people think they mean less. So what did you have for breakfast? So these are the kinds of foods we tend to eat. Anybody want to volunteer what they had for breakfast? Was it anything on here? Yeah.
I had a nice tea and I had a blueberry muffin.
Okay, was that healthy?
No.
Well, so maybe some of the blueberry muffin wasn't so bad, but I guess it depends on who made it. right? You can make a blueberry muffin, it can be very healthy, or you could buy a blueberry muffin and there can be very little good in it. Anyone else? All the way in the back. Yeah.
I had Greek yogurt with granola, strawberry.
Was it all natural?
Yeah, it was. With strawberries, bananas, and granola, and English breakfast tea.
Sounds pretty healthy. Anybody else? Anybody have a really unhealthy breakfast? Willing to admit it? Yeah.
I had a chocolate croissant on coffee.
So is that not good? No? Why not? What's wrong with that?
Well, the chocolate was in excess, and then the coffee was not good.
And the croissant. So maybe sort of understand. So is chocolate bad for you?
No.
Is anyone here think? No, right? So what, I mean, not to pick on you, but why would you think, or do you think that having a chocolate croissant is not good for breakfast?
The chocolate in the chocolate croissant probably has a ton of sugar in it.
Okay. So is sugar not good for you?
And excess.
Right, but just one croissant. Doesn't sound so bad, does it? Right. So even just trying to describe, just casually, right? Because what we're going to get together is talk about if we want corporations to cooperate. We want corporations to try to achieve some of the same outcomes that we want done, and we're going to collaborate with them. We have to be able to talk about it in a certain way. And if we start with, well, maybe chocolate's not good for you, or sugar's not good for you, we have to find a common place to try to say it clearly, right? Whether chocolate's good or bad, whether sugar's good or bad, whether those issues. So I think that's part of the dilemma, part of the contest. We have kind of camps a little bit around what is good for you and what is not good for you, right? We know what we want to eat, but this is what we actually eat. And maybe it's not so easy right now to translate those words into trying to decide whether a lot of other choices that we actually do consume end up meeting those standards or not those standards. And part of that as well is what do we actually mean by those standards? We'll talk a little more about some of those words just as examples. But if you start with some of those words, you can see maybe they're not so clear in terms of what would actually be an outcome, right? So I'm going to argue we need to change our thinking about food. Right? This is, I might argue, this is what we typically must think. But that's not going to get it very far if we're going to better understand how food affects us, affects society. But I'm going to argue that we can make a debate of good and a bad debate. There are good foods and there are bad foods. Or at least that's kind of my reading. I've been looking a lot at words that we use lately and collecting them on how we describe food. So you can see processed, junk, GMO. Obviously, those are considered to be the bad things. And the good things are wholesome, real, natural. You can go on a lot about those kinds of words. But so let's start with the good side. So does anyone want to take a stab? What does that mean, wholesome? Almost literally what does it mean? I mean, it sounds right, right? If you're having food, you wouldn't want it to be wholesome. But what does that really mean? Yeah.
It's nutritious to the body. They include nutrients the body needs.
So good stuff in there. But would we be able to tell wholesome food from not wholesome food? Or is it a matter of personal opinion, you think?
Scientifically.
Okay, so maybe in that case, wholesome might be useful. What about real food? That's been getting very common around, right? What would real food mean? Yeah.
A lack of processing?
Okay, so maybe not so much what it is, but what it isn't?
Yeah.
Right. So why don't we pause? So what does processed food then mean to you then? If we don't, like, is processed food bad food?
So it's, I guess anything that, I don't know, because even like apples are washed in factories and stuff like that. So I guess that technically would be processed, but I guess it's like an excessive amount of breaking down, cooking, cutting, turning into something else sort of thing.
But would that be, so are you saying, is that bad if we have a lot of processing? Or we maybe should ask somebody, like, what makes processing food bad, if it is? Or what kinds of processed foods are bad?
Well, processing tends to be like if you cook it, you remove a lot of the nutrients. If you cut it up or try to add sugar or something to it, you lose the nutritional value.
Right. Okay, so something is lost in the processing,
Yeah.
right, that you'd rather have, maybe that becomes more wholesome, right? Someone in the back was going to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, degrading its natural form down into, like he said, like degrading its nutrients and its fibers.
Right. Yeah.
So it might have added preservatives.
If it were processed. Right. Yeah. So are preservatives bad?
In this day and age, they're bad.
But maybe are all preservatives bad? Some preservatives are bad? I'm not trying to pick on you.
I don't know. Who knows?
I think, all right. I mean, I think that is the answer, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to consider that the answer really is who knows, because there's not enough, like, this is a fairly new thing, and there's not enough evidence to know what will happen, like, at the end of our lives because of it and stuff like that.
Right.
But there's just not enough to know whether there is a long-term effect of process or modified food.
So overall, this general idea that in the food we eat, there's something good in there, which is why we want to eat it in the first place, that somehow makes it maybe natural or makes it wholesome or makes it real. And on the other side, there's things that people do to it, right, that process it, make it junk, maybe even GMO, that makes it not good. But those words in and of themselves don't seem to work so well and try to help us set up where the boundaries are, right? If we can say, well, we don't want to process, well, so much food is, quote, processed, so what kind of processing don't we want? What are the conditions? And if you go to industry, you can't really say fairly, well, we don't want any processed food. But if you went to say, well, we want only the kind of processing that really takes out the good stuff in the food, the nutritional part of the food. So, I mean, they're not going to be able to respond, right? So we have to get more particular about the conditions, the terms, the situation, if we're going to collaborate. Then we really do understand what people are saying. Right. So, hopefully you read the article that we sent out, how junk food can end obesity. What did you think of that? Anybody have any reactions to that article? Any of you who read it have any reactions to that article? Somebody. Okay, go ahead.
It was interesting to sort of get a new perspective on this topic because no one really brought up this point, so I was intrigued by it. Totally.
Was he persuasive to you in general, or you weren't sure?
I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Anybody else have kind of a reaction to it? No, maybe we can go through for a minute or so, right? So we have these ideas maybe in our minds and a discussion about what would make for good food. We've got a choice of which of these restaurants to go to, right? Point is mostly that most people would choose to go to Sprouts or to Real Food Daily because that would seem to be where the good stuff is, not at McDonald's. But if you wanted a smoothie, now you've got some choices, right? About how much it costs, how many calories might be in it if that was the basis upon which we use it, and how long it takes. So it's not just the food, but part of his point is that people eat food a certain way. Some of them can afford certain kinds of food, other people can't afford it. Some people want to get it in a hurry, some people can afford it. And sometimes even paying more or waiting longer may not get you better value out of the food than what you think you're paying. And so when you line up where you go, so is it any surprising that McDonald's is doing so well? Right? They make so much money off of their beverages. Because if people want a smoothie, you can see that it is many more times affordable than someplace else. At least for the first two, the caloric value isn't that much different, maybe even lower, and it only takes a few cents. So maybe in the comparison of what we eat and where the sources are, trying to say, well, we should be trying to steer towards better food, stay away from the places that present processed food, but maybe the choices just aren't that simple and aren't that clear of where to go with that. So his thesis is, right, so we know what the junk food process is, for all I'm saying with the word, we know if you eat a lot of that, it's not good for you. But the point is that processed food, engineering food, right, managing food maybe has a real future. Why can't we take these foods that are junky processed foods and turn them into healthy foods, right? Because people eat what tastes good, people eat what's affordable, people eat what's convenient, people eat what's near them. It's just what we do. So why can't we figure out, using the science of food and engineering of food, to make a McDonald's hamburger which is really, really good for you? Does anybody think McDonald's would do that? Or does anyone think of a reason why McDonald's would not do that? Let's try it that way. Yeah.
Because their images like cheeseburgers and french fries, that kind of thing.
Right, so maybe making healthy food like that may not go. But anyone else? Why would McDonald's try to make their hamburgers so they really are good for you? The Washington Nationals fans.
It's so cheap to make what they make that it would cost a lot more money.
Maybe cost a lot more, right? So let's just start on that cost more, right? Let's go back to the smoothies, right? Who was the cheapest one when it came to the smoothies, right? So who is really smart and good at taking some kind of food, mass manufacturing it for people with easy access, low cost, and then making it available to people? McDonald's, right? So if there was a market for it, if they thought people would buy like they have the smoothies, maybe they would go ahead and make that kind of food as well, right? Why else? I saw some other hands up. Why else might not McDonald's be the one that goes to make that kind of a health? Yeah.
They're definitely succeeding at what they're doing with producing and selling healthy options.
Right.
So there's no reason for them to change at this point.
So anyone here an undergraduate from the business school, what might be a good reason? Oh, there you go. So, what's another reason? You're exactly right, right? To say that a company should change what they're doing, change their product, change what they're selling, change their marketing, everything, that's a very expensive proposition, isn't it? Right? They've got a lot invested in the brand, in what people rely upon, what they look to, what they really want. So just saying change it is the right thing to do. It might be an argument, but it's probably not very persuasive in getting them to change their behavior. So if we want them to change their behavior, maybe we have to try to find some good reasons why it may be in their own interest to do it. And can you think of one reason? What might be one great reason that it might be in McDonald's own interest to try to move more to healthier options? Yeah.
Well, I could be wrong, but I believe that beef and meat are the highest price that it's been over the past, I don't know, 5-10 years, and it'll stay that way for the next 5 years or so until the, I don't know exactly what happened, but there was a drought and something like that.
Sure.
So if it's in there, if the cost of beef gets too high, it will be better for them to look for cheaper alternatives, which might be veggie burgers and other things.
Right, right. See, so businesses always have to worry about being able to buy what it is they're selling you. They have to worry about their ability to every day buy it, get it to the stores, make it, and sell it to you, and you don't even know or notice. Right? That's what makes them so great, because every time you show up, it's there, just the way you want it. So when your supply chains, right, when your sourcing becomes at risk now or in the future due to price or shortages or other reasons, it gives business a reason to start thinking maybe I should change up a little bit, right? Maybe I should get ahead of it before I have to raise my prices. Maybe I could start persuading people that maybe eating less beef is actually healthy for you, right? Which is, if you think about exactly what McDonald's has been doing over the last 10 or 12 years. Been changing their menu, changing their message, slowly but surely moving into a story about healthier choices. They're not giving up the Big Mac because too many people love going in and eating a Big Mac. And I don't mind saying, I don't think, unless someone wants to say otherwise, I don't think there's anything wrong with eating a Big Mac. I think it's fine. If you eat 100 of them, 200 of them, 300, I'm right, I mean, there is a limit, but in and of itself, then people tend to like it. But if you can give them a reason to move away from that success they've had to find new success, maybe you can persuade them. Yeah.
I was just going to point out that they have a lot of success with their more like their salad, quote-unquote, lines, and they've offered the smoothie from the thing like a lot of people go and like get the smoothie drinks, you know, yogurt parfaits, oat, granola. They're trying to move into that kind of little niche that is being established as a large consumer area.
Yep, exactly right. So maybe the theme that I'm trying to get to is that while these might be kind of the bad guys, the people who make them might also make something else if we can give them a good business reason to make something else, just like McDonald's has been making, right, and to change over. So I'm not sure it's one versus the other, but how do we find a way to make a case that a transition that would be healthier in many ways, they might be able to make. Okay. So clearly, it's a complicated issue with all these different aspects, right? You and food, and the choices that you make, and which ones you have in front of you, right? So you might think of them as kind of breaking up into these categories. When it comes to food, you've got your own personal preferences for what it is you want. And maybe we talk about it being flavorful, and that's just marketing, right? They just want you to buy it because they think you'll like it. A second way to think about it is that it's, well, what's in the food? Like we talked about with the yogurt, right? And being all natural. It's trying to convey that it's good stuff in there. So that's marketing, but that's also authenticity. Is it really what it is being presented, right? It's like getting a fruit juice drink, and then when you read the label, you find there's almost no fruit in it. This is not good, right? It's not authentic. It's not really responsible as a corporation. It's kind of misleading the person who's buying it. Maybe 20 years ago, that was the way it was. Now, it seems totally acceptable to try to trick people into buying a product that it's something else that is. It's not being formulated. But the words that we use to communicate have this blend, not only of marketing, but of also trying to be authentic. And then you might be concerned about how food is prepared. So we have words like artisanal, which is about being healthier, right? Maybe making it the old-fashioned way. So whatever was good in the food before still is in there. That's marketing. But it's also about authenticity. It's also about your health. Maybe it's better for you because you're not using some modern processes. And lastly, how food impacts on the food system. Maybe some about organic, which has to do with all of these. So when you try to start using words and language about food, you can see they start to overlap in these different considerations, right? The marketing, actually saying it for real, actually worried about your health, actually involving public policy. And personally, I think it's really complicated and really overlaps. Very hard to get sometimes a really great conversation about it because people are coming at it from different angles using the same words meaning totally different things. So it's what do we want? So real quickly, right, some ideas. So we might say, well, we don't want GMO, right, as an example. It's a fairly popular kind of a view. But look, already, GMO is already so much deep within the food system. And you could say that's bad. We have to go back and we have to change it. But even to say we're against it is to mean it's already here in so many ways. And even saying GMO-free, and actually if you say GMO-free, that still means by regulation maybe 90 or 80% GMO-free. So there really isn't even a pure GMO-free, even the regulation. So to me, saying we don't want GMOs, okay, maybe you don't. But it's so far ingrained now in what we're doing, and if you want a corporation not to have GMOs, it's going to be a difficult change for them to do because it's already in the food system. So where are they going to buy the food that's not involved in GMO if it's not around, if most of it already is around, even if they wanted to? Anything about that? Right? So sometimes we use these phrases or use these ideas, but they're just not quite as simple to say, let's just do it, and then one side or the other side. Or we say local, one of my favorites. So, anybody here, what does local mean to you? Why do we want local food as opposed to any other kind of food? If you want local food. Yeah?
I think it's because there's a lower chance that it would need to be transported a long way, and then there would need to be preservatives or other things that are used to make them stay.
Right. So maybe it's local, right? It's just like you say, it doesn't have to go that distance. They don't have to put a whole lot of stuff in it in order to preserve it and do all that. But you can preserve it sometimes with things that are pretty harmful and right, and particularly if the foods aren't grown locally. But you're right, that's a good point. Sometimes going the distance, you have to alter the food in order to move that distance. What's another reason? Anybody? Yeah, all the way in the back.
You're also providing support for local farmers in your own community.
Right.
Giving money to big corporations.
Economic development benefits, definitely. Were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say the idea of shopping locally it brings up ideas of the small farmer in town next door, or, you know, the woman who makes her own jams. You're able to connect to it better than to larger food shelters.
So, all good reasons. So when you start saying we want local, but where do you draw the circle, right? If you go to a restaurant or you go to some food producer, where do you draw the circle of how local is? Is that a 10-mile radius? Is it a 100-mile radius? Is it a 250-mile radius? I mean, if you went to a company and said, we want you to appreciate the value of local, and that's what we want you to do, and they say, okay, how far away would be okay? And it's, right, it's not so clear that there's some scope of local. And a lot of people bring up the local because they're worried about the environmental impact, greenhouse gases from the transportation, but you can see stories where actually even shipping it on a container ship, bringing it from far away, has a smaller footprint than someone putting it on their truck and driving it 100 miles down to the local farmer's market. So again, if we're thinking about, well, what do we want, and if it's local, again, maybe it's just not so clear cut for people. And then even natural food, you can see the FDA hasn't settled on exactly what it is. Although, we know kind of intuitively what it is, which is great, but we may not be able to translate that into fairly specific kinds of ideas and policies. Okay. And I just want to throw it in, not only if that's enough, I mean, look how complex the food system is. All these interdependencies, all of these components, all of these effects. If you change one thing, you're going to change something else. It's really hard sometimes to come in and say, this is what we want, and then let's see if we can get people to come around and to do it and to follow our policy. So clearly, the food that you eat has an impact on you, and it has an impact on society, and it's a really critical issue. Maybe, I don't know, looking at some of the people who are as old as I am around here. Maybe 30 years ago, the issue wouldn't have come up. You just ate what you ate. You went to the store, you bought it. If it had some effect outside of that, it really didn't come across many people's point of view. I don't think that's the case now, right? More and more because you're aware of the consequences. Once you're aware, you have to kind of take some responsibility for what it is that you're buying and what impact that may have, not only on yourself, but on society. So let's try to take a very specific issue. I know I've been talking kind of broadly. So if we wanted to change something in the food system, and we wanted to see if we could make some progress in changing it, why don't we try to pick a very specific problem, and a very specific issue, which is the use of forced labor, slavery in the production of cocoa. Okay, and let's see if we can work through what might we do and how might we do it to actually make that change. I press the button, the video is supposed to come on. Let's see what happens.
The price you pay for a chocolate bar depends largely on the price of its main ingredient, cocoa. For the last 5 years, chocolate manufacturers around the world have been worried about cocoa supplies, for which more than 70% comes from Africa. I went to Ghana in West Africa to find out what multinational cocoa traders, chocolatiers and NGOs are doing to try and resolve the situation. Global confectionery sales are expected to reach record levels thanks to emerging markets craving for chocolate, with China, India and Brazil among the fastest growth countries. But cocoa crops are under pressure from urbanization and climate change, as well as competition from other crops. The global cocoa market has had a supply deficit for 7 out of the last 10 years, and the International Cocoa Organization forecasts consecutive deficits in the coming 5 years.
If you look at the top 3 cocoa producers, which is basically Ivory Coast, Ghana and Indonesia, the supply growth rate is struggling at about paltry 1 to 3% per year, and that's actually not enough in our view, and particularly these 3 areas are in politically and climatically very risky regions where you have yield issues, political issues, and a seemingly a structural decline in production.
In order to improve productivity and help farmers deal with funding, cocoa traders and chocolate manufacturers are investing. I visited communities where Olam International, an agricultural trading house, is running a $1 million 3-year project run in partnership with the Rainforest Alliance, an environmental NGO.
So it's important for us from a business context to have these win-win partnerships established. and to be able to impact the productivity of the farms, to be able to help improve the livelihoods of the cocoa farmers, create more vibrant cocoa communities, and on the other end of the chain, to be able to meet our customer demands, which are increasingly around quality and traceability and around our ability to manage supply chains itself. It does make a lot of business sense.
Farmers on the program, which promotes environmentally friendly cultivation, are encouraged to develop supplementary incomes such as keeping bees and selling honey. Initiatives like this one are spreading. The International Cocoa Organization counted 60 such programs involving 64 companies in 2012. The rise in the number of programs supporting cocoa farmers have raised some concerns among industry experts, who have noted the increase in uncoordinated and sometimes competing initiatives. Other critics point out that some of the pilot projects only help a handful of farmers and are not scalable. OLEM says income levels for the Ghanaian farmers involved in its program have risen by about 25%. In West Africa, the group is helping 65,000 cocoa growers with its initiatives. But in order to secure future supplies in the face of growing demand, the chocolate industry needs projects like these to work on a wider scale. Emiko Terrazono, Financial Times, Tashia Kron, Ghana.
Okay, so that's a really nice story, right? Told through the Financial Times about cocoa and cocoa production and expansion. But have any of you heard about the role of slavery and forced labor in cocoa production? Right? So that doesn't, if not, right? A lot of the pressure in order to expand production from labor for recruiting, having young kids forced into labor and producing. Right? It seems almost intolerable today to have kind of slavery in the cocoa industry. So I would argue that if we're talking about you and your role in the food system, that if you're eating chocolate, there's a certain responsibility, if you could, to try to figure out whether you buying that chocolate is actually promoting the use of slavery in that chocolate. Is the chocolate you're eating, was it made with slave labor? Right? And so how would we do that? How would we figure out how to get you to know the information so you could make that decision, or how to get business to figure out whether they could make that decision, right? So then it wouldn't be there, which means that anyone who is using slaves in their cocoa production, right, then wouldn't be able to sell the product. Right? Any idea? Yeah?
Fair trade certification.
Right, right. So I'm saying 3 different ways, right? So fair trade is where you go in and you certify that certain conditions are okay. If you study that certification business, as I have, it's a hard business because it's difficult, in fact, to certify on the ground, like the film showed, that in fact the cocoa that you're using and buying, it's not bad at the farm level, although that's hard. But the cocoa is purchased, it's moved up the line, it's blended together and processed, and then how do you know whatever happened? Right? So certification might fall into this corporate social responsibility realm, right? The companies might be willing to buy certified chocolate, but it's not that clear that certification actually reflects the lack of, right, forced labor in cocoa. So what does that do for the corporation? It puts them at risk, right? What if a company claims that they're buying conflict-free cocoa, and it turns out that a video comes out like it could and shows slave labor on a certain place where they bought their cocoa from? That really puts their reputation at risk. So that certification is not a bad approach, but it often doesn't deliver. People often don't buy based on that. It's hard to tell. So it is an approach, but it's not one that's worked great. So what I'm going to offer is maybe this 3rd way. The policy, I'm going to leave that to Mary. You can talk about one approach. Of course, you can go make people aware and pass proper laws and just outlaw. You could go to corporations, like you said, with certification, or try to get them to do it based on their responsibility, but it may not be so clear what they should do. So I'm going to talk about this 3rd way, multi-sector collaboration, right? I'm going to argue that this is an approach which maybe we should consider to try to solve more of our food problems. The reason why I spent so much time in the beginning talking about the words and the issues and the policies is because I think now we spend a lot of time arguing about what something should or shouldn't be, what we call it or don't call it, what it is, and I've been spending more of my time interested in how might we try to collaborate in order to advance progress on shared interests and ideas. Right? So this is the basic approach. Groups together, shared interests, They believe that they can accomplish more together than acting alone. That's not just me saying it, that's why they participate. If you're a company like a Nestle or a Mars or Hershey, you might believe we can actually get more done working with these guys than working outside. And it gets you to leverage resources and expertise. Everyone's short of money. No one has enough. No one has enough time. No one has enough resources to take on problems. Maybe by collaborating, pooling them, you can have more luck. But it's not the perfect solution, mind you. Right? There's definitely this clash of cultures where people don't trust each other. Right? The NGOs don't trust the corporation. Right? The corporations don't think the government people are very smart. Right? The NGOs don't have much money, so they're kind of limited. Getting people in a room to work together on a shared problem, that's a problem. So part of the multi-sector collaboration process is convincing them that it's worth the effort. Because everyone has an interest in saying the slave-free chocolate, of course, the chocolate is good for the person who's selling it, the person who's buying it, it's good for the corporation and reputation, it can help improve the supply chain, so that's what it comes to. But a lot of times, right, regulatory wolf in collaborative sheep's clothing. What I mean is, many times people go to the political process in order to get some policy adopted that they want, right? Maybe outlaw through human trafficking legislation that outlaws the human trafficking approach, but they can't get it passed in the legislature because they don't have enough votes. So they get frustrated, but they think, okay, so we'll collaborate. But they're really doing the same thing in collaboration. They're just still bringing their idea to the companies and saying, here's what you should do, right? Rather than trying to think about a collaborative process. Like I said, there's definitely a lack of trust, and there's even concern whether some of these approaches are really legitimate. So they're relatively new forms of governance, some success, some failures, but it's an approach that's a little bit different, and people are looking at it more and more to try to do it. So we have this partnership paradigm that we use. Real quickly, okay? Because I want to get to the last part. But we've been doing our research at the Institute, and there are some design principles that we can use, and there are some collaboration principles that we can use. The one I want to point to, because I've been going a little too slow, is empathy. So if you're going to collaborate, that means, right, you have to try to understand where the other person's coming from. And then you have to work with them collaboratively. It's not a matter of going in and trying to say who's right and who's wrong. It's trying to say, what are your problems? If I ask you to try to assure that you're not buying cocoa that was used with slave labor, what problems would you have? So NGOs could be helping corporations then to solve those problems. It's typically not the approach. And the same thing, right? What could a corporation do to help a government official if they wanted to help and endorse on their project? Maybe they could get some more visibility, right? Maybe they could help an elected official be affiliated with it. That would help them in their career. Make a nice speech about it. Be able to take credit for it, right? Be able to claim that they're doing a good job. It's all about trying to figure out what other people want and then help them solve that problem because you're in it together, okay? Be glad to talk more about that. So we don't impose, we're supposed to propose. So here's some of the stakeholders if we were looking for conflict-free chocolate. The people who finance and the farmers, those who certified, as you mentioned, the people who purchase, the retailers, there's technical expertise out in the field, and of course the individuals who all have a stake potentially in having this work a certain way, but we need them to work together. So already, in practice, people are working together. There's technical and social expertise, groups in the field, trying to work with the farmers, improve their productivity, trying to certify, well, I'll get to that in a second, trying to work so that they can get loans from the banks. If you don't get the money from the bank, then you can't upgrade your farming, and then you can't make an improved position. And the certifiers are working with the farmers and trying to communicate to the individual consumers, like you had mentioned, that if this certificate is on it, then that means it's a good thing to buy, and try to work with that. And of course, all these work together, from purchasers, middlemen and retailers, up to the individual consumers, branding their product, marketing their product, trying to tell a story about what it is you're buying, right? But we have to find a way for them to work together and to collaborate, and that comes back to my point before. If that's going to happen, we need to know how to use the words so that we're all using the same words at the same time, right? So here are some connections within the sustainable cocoa supply chain. We do have certifications, and my argument is that right now it's too much supply push. What I mean by that is we spend too much time down here with the standards of certifiers, trying to get the farmers to grow it, trying to make technical expertise, right? And then we take that cocoa and we move it down the supply chain, turn it into chocolate, and then try to get someone to buy it. And so far that has worked really very well. If you study the different certification efforts, how much is actually bought, what market share is it? Not very big at all, right? So it becomes a problem. So maybe if we switch it and make it a demand pull approach. So that difference being really we start here with what kind of chocolate do people want to buy, right? And you can see in this day and age, and particularly generationally, I would bet that if you asked people who would not want to buy chocolate that had a role that was played by using slave labor or forced labor, no one would want to, at least if they heard about it. It's just hard for them to make those choices now within the marketplace because we don't present it that way. So, but if you know that that's what people want to buy, then you start looking down the supply chain as to who can provide it for you. Who can grow the cocoa under the conditions that would allow you to claim that what it is you're selling is what you claim it to be selling. So that comes back to that authenticity. Companies have a problem because what they tell their consumers, they have to stand behind it. Their reputation's at risk, like I mentioned before. So if you start with the supply side and then someone moves it towards you and you make claims for it, if those original claims of the certifiers aren't true, you're the one that the customer blames. They don't go and blame the certifier. They don't even know who the certifiers are. They'll blame Hershey, or they'll blame Mars, or they'll blame someone else, right? So what you want to do is to make sure that on this side, demand pull, that this is something, in fact, not only that they're willing to do, but they want to do. They want to sell that product because people out there are willing to buy it and open up a new line for them. So now it's a matter of how can they actually get the suppliers line to make that thing. You see the difference, right? One started at one end where people come up with ideas and try to move it, and the other says, no, let's see if we can come up with a product that does reflect that standard, and now who can make that for us? Okay. So we'll need to change our thinking, like I said before, yummy, easy, and cheap, to what's good for me, what's good for the world, and of course, what tastes good, right? We're not giving that. So I don't want to say through all this that for those of you who feel very passionately about a number of food issues that you shouldn't feel passionate. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. For these collaborative arrangements to work, you need people who are willing to come in and help organize these kinds of arrangements, who try to push the boundaries, to come up with some new venture. It's definitely a generational thing, of where you're saying we no longer feel it's acceptable, in this case, to have chocolate in the marketplace that uses slave labor. Okay, then let's go get rid of it. Could be through public policy, could be through corporations doing what you would want them to do, but maybe through collaboration, getting them to see a self-interest in making it is really a more probable model of making something successful. So this was the challenge to Jose that I talked about. Great. Let's take another challenge, right? Okay. So could we get Jose to agree to only buy conflict-free cocoa and make chocolate and sell it at his restaurants? So that his customers know that anytime they're eating one of those incredibly yummy chocolate desserts, that they know for sure that they're not promoting in any way, they have no role to play in forced labor or slavery. Do you think we could get him to do that as a business, to go out on the limb, right? Take a bit of a risk?
What do you think?
Okay, well, what if we change it? Right? So I would say before we challenge Jose, I would challenge you. Because there's no way you can go to a business, or not likely, and say, here, do this thing without really knowing the business implications, what it's going to do to his company, what his customers are going to think, what it's going to do to his procurement policies. Can he get in the chocolate that he needs? Can he make the desserts? All the things that he relies upon, that people come to his restaurant for, could he still keep those things? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
And Professor, will people be ready to pay the real cost of having the chocolate?
Exactly. what I'm proposing, if any of you are interested, is that for I was thinking about this and I was thinking of proposing a challenge. I thought, well, that's not really fair. So at the Institute, we're going to organize a research project this summer looking at conflict-free cocoa. And we're going to go do a business case analysis to go see whether that makes sense. Because right now, it's even possible that Jose is very lucky. And the chocolate that he's buying in the cocoa already is conflict-free. Maybe, right?
Should be. We use two companies, Valrhona and Guitar. And on paper, they tell us is that the cocoa comes from those sources that they can claim only the same.
Right. So we'll go see, right, whether that's done and look in because of some of those sources. So if you want to join ICR and if you want to be part of that project, then just contact us. Send Drew a note. I've been talking to a few students. If you're interested in working for ICR this summer on the project and doing a business case analysis on conflict-free chocolate. So that's a way of collaboration in order to make it easy for a company to say, yes, I can do it, rather than just asking to do something, right, and looking at the cost. Maybe the cost wouldn't go up if we had to ship the supply, right? Possible it might even go down. One question I had for you, do you think you would market it to your customers? Call it what? Well, you wouldn't call it conflict-free chocolate. That's not a good
Today,
brand.
I went to Shake Shack
Yeah.
because I'm researching and I'm trying to learn. And it's very funny because on the menu they have certain things claiming that this comes from X place and is not using child labor. And I was fascinated by that actually in the menu they have 5 places that actually they are getting into politics of telling us maybe more than maybe what we want to know. Or maybe not. Maybe we want to know. What I learned is that a menu cannot be everything. And so very much a restaurant, a chef, a restaurateur is a broker towards the people. If they care about what they do. So if they're coming to my place and they care about all the things we're talking here, I'm the broker of making sure that what they're eating follows all the social rules of engagement.
Yeah. And that it's authentic, right? Whoever you represent, right?
Correct. But they will say that a lot of people don't really care. Maybe in the first place because they are not even aware that we have this issue in the first place.
We should brand it. We should call it bona fide chocolate or something, right? Or whatever it is. And maybe you put a little note so people could see all of our desserts are named by, right? I mean, that's what we don't know. We'll spend some time on that this summer.
Maybe we should call it GW for goodwill.
Oh, I like it. Every time. Yeah.
That will be only goodwill, but actually
goodwill chocolate. I like it. That's good. All right. So that's the end of my presentation. Like I said, if you want to send anything to Drew and want to be a part of the research project, please do, and all that. And so with that, I think it's Marian's turn now.
Who's going to take that challenge? Everybody, right?
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Ford. That was really interesting. So now I have the pleasure of introducing one of my personal professional heroes. We're both public health nutritionists. So Dr. Marian Nessel is an absolute leader in the field, and I'm just thrilled that she's here with us today. She's the Paulette Goddard Professor in the Department of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health at New York University. She's also a professor of sociology at NYU and a visiting professor in nutritional sciences at Cornell. Many of you probably know her as an author of 4 prize-winning books: Food Politics, How the Food Industry Influences Nutrition and Health, Safe Food, The Politics of Food Safety, What to Eat, and Why Calories Count, From Science to Politics. She's also, this is another thing that I find very endearing about you, you've also written 2 books about pet food, also near and dear to my heart. She's written Pet Food Politics, The Chihuahua in the Coal Mine, and Feed Your Pets Right. Her most recent books, just in the past year, include the 10th anniversary edition of Food Politics. I can't believe it's been 10 years. I have the original version in my office. And the paperback edition of Why Calories Count. But she's also written a very fun book called Eat, Drink, and Vote, an illustrated guide to food politics, which basically is a collection of food politics-related cartoons. It's just really great. She blogs almost daily on one of my favorite blogs. It's top up there on my reader, foodpolitics.com. And she also tweets at Marion Nessel if you're interested in following her. I also think it's a lot of fun. She's had a lot of awards that are kind of fun to announce. In an article for Forbes, Michael Pollan ranked her as the #2 most powerful foodie in America after Michelle Obama. And Mark Bittman ranked her as #1 on his list of foodies to be thankful for. That must have been a Thanksgiving edition. Great. This is fun too. She has been awarded an honorary Doctor of Science degree from Transylvania University in 2012. And she also has won the James Beard Leadership Award in 2013. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Marion Nessel, and I think she's going to do a very informal presentation, commentary on what Dr. Ford just presented.
Oh,
and then we'll do...
am I?
Are you? That's what I was told.
I was just told I was going to answer questions.
Well, we can do that as well.
But before I do that, I have a really silly request. Does anybody have an extra pair of socks? I've got the world's coldest feet, and my shoes are soaking really heavy. If anybody has a pair of gym socks or something like that, could I just borrow them for an hour? It would make for so much more comfortable an experience. I was very glad I got to hear this lecture because it just said, first of all, you have gorgeous slides. I'm very envious of your slides.
We got that. We got that.
You do?
We are very prepared at this class.
I know this is so gauche. I'm really sorry. I am so grateful. So grateful. You have no idea. And I promise to give them back.
You could probably sell them on eBay.
Video out, please.
And he needs a blanket because he's so big.
Yeah, a blanket and a shirt or...
Thank you. It's such a difference. I have no idea. Thank you. So do I need this? I need this, yes?
Yes.
No, so you have beautiful slides, and and I thought your presentation was really interesting. It's it reminded me a lot of a meeting that I've gone to for nearly 20 years now at the Harvard Business. It started out at the Harvard Business School, and it was run by the agribusiness professor at the Harvard Business School, who's now retired. About 20 years ago, he got the idea that if he brought food industry executives together with government officials and food advocates, that he would be able to create a detente around some of the most controversial issues that were going on in food. And the issue at the time that it started was genetically modified foods, an issue that's not going to go away. And so the meeting came together, and it included the CEO of Monsanto and the CEO of, it started out at the CEO level, and the CEO of some other genetic engineering companies, and there were government officials there and some other food advocates besides me, and different people would give different presentations, short presentations on different issues, and then there was downtime when people would talk to each other. But I would never have had the opportunity to meet CEOs of these companies in any other way, so I absolutely was going to be there. And I got to watch the CEO of Pioneer Hybrid scream at the CEO of Monsanto for the way that Monsanto behaved in sort of its behavior with consumers, its absolute arrogance about saying that there was nothing wrong with these products and they were going to sell them no matter what. And it was fascinating to watch the sort of within the industry arguments about, in particular, Monsanto's behavior. And this has gone on now for 20 years, and you know what? Nobody's budged an inch on that issue. The issues that were there from the beginning are still exactly the same issues that everybody is arguing about, although people are very polite to each other, and we meet every year, and you know, everybody's great friends. But the aim of the meeting was to convince the food activists that there was nothing wrong with genetically modified food. That was its purpose in the beginning. It wasn't about, let's try to find a coordinated way to approach an issue that's really complicated and not going to be easy to solve. It was really about power. And the food advocates in the organization know that. I mean, for one thing, the amount of money that we make and the amount of money that the people who work for these corporations make is quite different. It's really quite different. Academics don't make very much money on the scale of hedge fund managers. I mean, I think I make a very nice living, but it's a middle class living. It's not an upper class living. And these were people who were flying into Boston on their own private jets. That's a different kind of social class, completely. And so I thought the power relationships were very different. And from the standpoint of the corporate executives, why did they have to listen to us? We were annoying. We were really troublesome to them. And why did they need to listen to us? We were just people who didn't make very much money and weren't very important. And there was another example of something quite similar, and I give Tom Vilsack a lot of credit for trying to develop a detente between the producers of genetically modified foods and the organic meat. He brought executives of corporations who were doing organics and genetically modified foods together to try to figure out some way that they could coexist. And the coexistence issue is that corn has this pesky problem that makes pollen, and pollen drifts, and it drifts for miles. And so if you've got a field that's growing genetically modified corn next to an organic field, that pollen is going to come and contaminate some of the organics. And there are ways of lessening that problem. You build refuges, and you make sure there's land in between that's not. And really, the kinds of things that would do that don't seem that difficult or complicated. But he got absolutely nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. Not for lack of trying. And the reason was that the makers of genetically modified foods couldn't care less. I mean, they weren't interested in cooperating or collaborating. So you have to ask the question about these kinds of collaborations is in whose interest is it to collaborate. Now, it may be that in the case of chocolate, that if there's bad publicity about it over a long enough period of time, the companies that are making chocolate and not paying attention to their worker rights and issues will have to pay attention to it because they'll lose money. But that requires an enormous amount of advocacy. And that's why I said you've got to advocate. Absolutely must. It's the only thing that is holding these corporations in check at this moment in time. If we didn't have advocacy, they've already taken over the Supreme Court and everything else. So if we didn't have advocacy, it would be much, 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 much worse. And I think advocacy is essential in the food area to try to keep some of these really terrible corporate practices on check. That's where I'm coming from. So you're not nodding your head and disagreeing with me. Not at all.
No, not disagreeing, and advocacy is critical. I was going to say, I think there's more opportunity for business because they feel, and like you say, the GMOs, I think you're exactly right. There's some industries that just refuse to change. They're not interested in collaboration, and so that's it. But the risks that many of them face in their supply chains and sourcing security issues that they feel dearly, they don't know how to address them. And it can make them a little more pliable if you can say, here's what we want to do. Maybe in doing it, we can fix some of your problem if you're willing to fix some of mine. if they don't feel that threat, then they're not going to feel much need in order to come around. But many of them feel under threat. So.
Well, they do feel under threat, and for good reason.
Yeah.
There's too much food. We don't have to buy this food, we can buy that food. I mean, I don't know how long that will last with the world's population expanding. I don't know, I'm sort of started in the middle here, but that was, that was my reaction, my personal reaction to that, as the examples that I've seen on that. And GMOs are interesting to talk about because farmers love them. 90% of the major crops in the United States are genetically modified. So the first question you have to ask is, why do farmers love them? They love them because they only have to dump pesticides on a couple of times during the summer instead of all the time, and it's less, the pesticides are less toxic than some of the others. And the business about weeds resisting these pesticides is interesting too, because in 1994, when the FDA approved genetically modified foods, I was on the FDA Food Advisory Committee at the time. And all I can say is they didn't listen. Because there were 4 of us who were consumer representatives on that committee, and we said, you gotta label it. You absolutely must label it, and you must worry about weeds becoming resistant to Roundup. And again, we were treated as if we were flies on the wall, or ants or something like that. It could be easily squashed. And really nobody listened. And it's hard to be right all the time. It really is. And what surprised me is not that there's this big labeling movement, but it took so long. I mean, it just never occurred to me it would take this long. So it's an interesting issue with polarized, absolutely polarized positions that don't budge. With one side saying they're safe, what's wrong with them, and the other side saying, but you people aren't nice. And it's 2 different issues, very different. So I don't know, what do you want me to do?
Should we open up to questions?
Yeah, let's open it up to questions. I've been talking too much anyway. I want to hear from you. What are they telling you in here that I'm going to disagree with? That'd be fun.
Hi, thank you for coming to our class. I was curious what your thoughts are on changing the way that we do subsidies, especially with the most recent Farm Bill, and how much progress we've made and where we need to go to change the way we do subsidies in our farm system.
Well, we didn't make much progress this year. We don't have direct subsidies anymore, but there's been a substitute, which is the insurance plan. It doesn't change it that much. When I taught a course on the Farm Bill at NYU a few years ago, I can't imagine how I was so brave or naive to think that I could take it on. But I thought it was something we could just learn together, and it turned out students don't like learning together with their professor. They expected me to know something. It got a little sticky. But one of the things we learned together was that you want to be in the crop insurance business. Ooh, this is a wonderful business. It's really wonderful because the government pays most of the premium, and if there's a problem, the government kicks in and spends most of the money. So it's taxpayer supported. It's a business that can't fail. And there are only about 16, I'm not sure that's the exact number, but it's under 20 companies that do crop insurance. And they're very happy people. Very, very happy people. The subsidy issue is interesting because there have been all kinds of economic analyses that say that subsidies don't make any difference. And they may not make any difference. I think they're talking about the price of food. But I don't think that's the issue. The subsidies act as an enormous incentive. And they create incentives for, most recently for expanding production of commodity crops from, to the extent that they can be expanded at the expense of conservation and other kinds of things. And the incentives that they put in are not the kinds of incentives that people who care about sustainable agriculture would particularly want. There were some attempts in this Farm Bill to introduce some pilot projects and some other things. There were some some good things in the conservation area, but really small compared to the whole thing. And because the Farm Bill is so weighted down by SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, it's really hard to deal with farm issues separate from anything else. They're so closely linked together and tied together because neither one of them can pass without the other, that you can't really have a thoughtful discussion about how to deal with poverty in the United States or how to deal with agriculture in the United States without getting mired in the most complicated politics you could ever imagine. I mean, this bill is enormous. I ended up that course thinking that it wasn't just me that couldn't understand it. Well, I can understand little pieces of it, but nobody can understand it as a whole. And that means that no legislator can understand it as a whole, which means that legislators are making decisions about agriculture and welfare policy based on what lobbyists tell them, because nobody could read this thing and understand it. It's not readable. And it's not readable because it refers to 5 previous farm bills. And so what you want is you want somebody to go through and do an expanded farm bill, so everything is all laid out in front of you. If anybody's done that, I don't know about it. So it's really hard to read. It's big. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of programs. And I brought in as a visiting lecturer, a woman who had been on a staff person to a Senate Agricultural Committee for 8 years. And if anybody knew the Farm Bill, she knew the Farm Bill. And it was incredible to hear how she learned it. I mean, she completely agreed. You can't read it. You can't figure it out for yourself. It's not possible. She said that they would meet with lobbyists on this committee. The lobbyists would come in, and the lobbyists would care about one particular issue. So she'd learn about that issue. And then the next lobbyist would come in, and she'd learn about the next lobbyist's issue. And after 8 years, she'd heard a lot of lobbyists and knew about a lot of issues. And has a level of expertise that must be worth a fortune. I mean, I don't know what she's doing now. Oh, yes, I do. Yes, she's working for a senator in Ohio now, who's very interested in agricultural issues. And I mean, she must be worth a fortune to somebody because she knows something that hardly anybody knows. And I ended up thinking that it was just the most undemocratic thing that you could ever imagine, because if legislators don't know what they're voting on, then it's not democratic. And everybody said, well, how is this different from the energy bill? How is that different from health care? It's not. There's just a limit to what they can know. And so there's another place where advocates can get in and try to educate members of Congress. It's a big issue here. Did I answer your question? I can't even remember what it was.
Next question.
Anybody else?
Well, I don't think this question might be to both of you. But I'm thinking of the cocoa example, and I'm thinking more of a domestic issue. We learned about how many undocumented migrants are treated here in meat packaging plants. So perhaps if we think of like child slavery and cocoa production in Africa, like there might be more consensus that that's not okay. But in cases of how undocumented migrants are treated here in the food industry, how do you think there could be a collaboration to improve that in an issue where there is no, it's not asked clear cut what should be done or what is okay and what is not. Or to the people, to me there is, but.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. I think it would go back to Jose's response. Are you willing to pay for food what it's going to cost if you pay and treat workers in some decent way? I mean, the meat packing work issue is a particular one. I don't know if any of you saw Eric Schlosser's movie, Fast Food Nation, the movie. A truly dreadful piece of cinema, but never mind. It depicted, I think, for people who have no experience with slaughterhouses, what it's like to be an undocumented immigrant working in a slaughterhouse. It was very rough, very, very difficult to watch. If you can find it, it's worth, actually, for this class, it's not a great movie. It was made by a great director. They did fiction instead of documentary. I think it should have been, it would have been better as a documentary. But it's got a lot of stuff in it that really makes you stop and think. And it starts with Mexican migrants coming across the border and under horrible, horrible circumstances. And that was even before the wall was built. And you know, you want to do that. First of all, you have to shed light on it. And there are states all over the country that are passing laws that are making it illegal for people to go into slaughterhouses and photograph what's going on. Ag-gag laws. So there's a place where you need a lot of advocacy. There are immigrants which have you know, that Congress won't even touch it. They won't touch the immigration issue because it's so controversial and divides the country so badly. And you know, I think these are huge problems in society that you can approach through food, and fairness and justice and all of those kinds of American values that Americans value a lot. But you have to humanize it in a way so that people can feel sympathy instead of feeling like these are people who are trying to take something away from us. I don't know how you do that. We're in interesting political times these days. You want to say something about that?
Yeah, I think that's all set there. So I think two areas, right, you would look in terms of the collaboration, right? Because one is you would try to think about different firms that are selling that product and their reputation. And it doesn't have to be like Whole Foods necessarily. Kroger's cares about their reputation. And if you can bring the advocacy of the issue to say this is something you should care about and your customers care about, and you can start to make them think about it, they'll start pressuring back, and firms more and more concerned about their reputation. And I mean that in a very financial way. When you listen to people who are on the boards of directors of corporations, they talk about the firm's reputation in a monetary sense. So if you can bring it up and the company thinks that their customers might be, don't even have to wait until it's protested. They'll anticipate, the board will say, what are you doing to make sure you're addressing that issue to keep our reputations? And the second thing then you have to work on is how could it change, right? And using those workers be done in a way that might improve productivity. What's an innovative way that you could change the way in which they do it now so that it's a win-win? Now, it's not always easy, it's not always obvious. That's why part of the collaboration of they're probably doing it this way because that fits the way they've done it for a long time. They know what the costs are, they know what the business structure is, they know if they pay people a certain amount, then they can get it done. So if you can think of an innovative way where paying them more translates into more productivity, okay, at least they'll listen, right? Or some will listen. Some are locked in their ways. But I think you've got to approach it through the, if you change, you can do better than you are now. And see if it's way. And sometimes it's clear, but that's what at least makes the collaboration interesting for people who want to be governance entrepreneurs to think of exactly those ways, right? Things are changing all the time how we do it. So why not you coming up with a better, more innovative way of processing it so people can get paid more and the company actually welcomes it because they're being more tired. That would be, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about the, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, the Imology workers in, am I even close to getting that right? Immokalee? Yeah, in Florida, the tomato pickers. And the union worked there using those kinds of approaches, that this is going to be better for you, it's going to be better for the business, it's going to be better for everything. And they won a 1 cent a box increase. And it will make the most enormous difference to the lives of the tomato pickers. I mean, it was considered just this overwhelming victory that they were able to do that. And also at this Harvard Business School meeting that I go to, they showed, the guy who ran the meeting showed Food Inc. at this meeting. I mean, he really went out on a limb. It did not go over well. I think I can say. It did not go over well. And the next morning I had breakfast with one of the, have you all seen Food Inc? Yeah, you've all seen it. So the scene in Food Inc that got me really, really, just the one that I found was most painful, was when the sheriff's office came at 4 o'clock in the morning into the workers' shacks where they were living. Oh, these were Smithfield ham workers, and arrested them and deported them because it had a deal with the company to deport a certain number of people, and it was working together with the company to control its labor. It was so excruciatingly painful to watch because they were these big burly sheriff's people and these little tiny sort of stunted men who were just trying to make a living and take care of their families. I mean, it was really, really upsetting to me. And I sat down at the table the morning after this, and here were a bunch of executives from Smithfield. And they started blistering. And I said, you know, it really was really painful to watch. And they said, oh, we could solve that problem easily. I said, oh yeah, how could you solve that? He said, we could just pay our workers more. Nearly fell off my chair. And I said, what's the business model in paying your workers more? He said, we would have to charge 1 cent more a pound for pork if we paid our workers, I don't know, $1 an hour more or something like that. Whatever it was staggeringly small. And I said, well, why don't you do that? And solve your workers' problem. Then you'd have a loyal employees who would be more productive and would like working for you better, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, oh no, we couldn't do that. Our competitors would undercut us. That's why we need regulation. Level playing field. Level playing field. That's why you need it. Regulations don't always work that well, but I think it's not a bad first step.
We have time for one more, or is time?
It is time. We have one more question.
One more question? So, Dr. Ford, really this was a great class. Mrs. Nessel, thank you very much for coming.
My pleasure.
But you mentioned one word more times than any other word. And the word was advocacy. Advocacy.
Oh, yeah.
And if we're going to be taking something from this class, is because some of you, in the years to come, doesn't matter in what field are you going to end, you should become precisely that, advocates of change. And we need to level the field, because those lobbies that you were talking about seems that more often than not, there are lobbies that support one side of the equation.
They're paid to.
Correct. So it's nothing against them. But because we are a university where pragmatism is key, but we need this only, as you said before, to level down the field. So we need more people to try to bring another point of view. So not everything is one-sided. And hopefully start moving forward. We mentioned 2 words here, local. Dr. Forer, you talk about immigration, about the immigrants coming. Who likes the idea of local? Who likes the idea of buying only local? Right? That's great, but only thing about it, if we began producing only local, who ate an avocado in the last week? Or something with avocado? Come on, raise your hand. So on one side, you are local. On one side, you ate avocados. And the closest is California. Hundreds of miles. But probably they come from Mexico. What's connection, and that's what we're looking here in this class, between loving one, being non-local, or all of a sudden helping immigrants, and what connection has at all, if any. Well, actually, think about it. If we buy avocados at the right price, and we take care of making sure that those avocados come from farms and companies that take care of their workers in Mexico, we're doing precisely what we try to do, and maybe we don't think about it, which is be helping those people, thousands of people that live out of producing avocados, so Chipotle can serve you their fajitas and their burritos with. But at the same time, somehow goes against local, right? And do we feel guilty by having our local tomatoes with avocados that come from thousands of miles away.
What's wrong with that?
Nothing, but at the same time is what we're trying always to be seen in the unbelievable complexity of what you showed us before, that every single decision has in front of us. Every food we buy, every restaurant we go, every ingredient is a form of active democracy. We do an action with our shopping, with our decision, and has a huge influence in everything that happens before. So it's only one of the ideas we need to be taking. Advocacy is precisely having a voice about issues that they are more complex than white and black, and that we have to be thinking in a very holistic way, 360 degrees, understanding that if you're going to go with the flag of local, that's fine, but maybe it's a bit radical. If all of a sudden you go with everything is okay and we can, maybe it's also radical. Pragmatism in the middle and trying to see all these connections that everything, every decision we make, every time we decide to buy a food, all the implications, all the synergies, for good or for bad, that every decision we make has, is probably the most important thing. And more people that are going to be advocates of change and trying to level down the field is one of the most important things you can be doing the day you graduate a few years from now.
Do it now. Yeah. Can I just make one comment on that?
Please.
You know, I think it's great to support local, but it doesn't have to be 100%. I mean, the thing, if everybody bought a little local food, we would have farmers locally who were making a living. It doesn't have to be 100%. It's just some, and paying attention to it, and making these issues serious. So, anyway, thank you